Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Angelucci. I'm a managing director for Alvarez and Marsal. I lead the digital and technology services organization in Southeast Asia and Australia. This today, I'm talking with one of my good friends, JP Morgenthal, and our plan is to actually discuss AI. And while this is a topic that I think everybody has addressed, I think what we would like to do is take a different look at how it is that you can actually enable this in your organization and what some of the challenges are to get you there. But before we get started, JP, please take the time to introduce yourself.
And thank you, and good evening over there. It's morning here in the U.S. I'm based in the United States in Florida. JP Morgenthal. I am the CEO of a company called NexAgent Solutions. We help companies implement agentic solutions right now based on real pragmatic understanding of what this technology does, but also help them with the adoption and overcoming hurdles in making this production level systems within the U.S. Prior to that, my history is long and sordid. Serial CTO, entrepreneur. I have worked for large corporations, expertise in managed services, retail management, distribution, logistics, financial services, and I would say to sum it up real easily, my jam, so to speak, the thing I have always done is jump on new technologies as they're emerging to understand them and help enterprises understand what the state of the art, what the art of the possible is, and also how to adopt and bring these technologies in a governed manner within the enterprise.
Excellent. Serial CTOs. No cure for that, is there?
There is not. You and I both suffer from that. Although you're doing much better than I am. It seems like it's a very difficult role to escape because it's so broad, and everything else is a box that everyone expects you to be able to fit in. And the truth of the matter is, the skill set just expands outside of the box very quickly.
100%.
Marketing, it's technology understanding. For me, it's even hands-on, right? These technologies I am hands-on experienced with. So, having somebody that can actually implement your, agentic solution, but also explain to a CEO or a CIO or a COO what the right agent design is so that they can improve performance of their organization is a unique capability.
Excellent. Well, look, so I think one of the things I wanted to kind of start off with was a bit of a high level view to artificial intelligence. What's been different about it in terms of as the technology has emerged over the last couple of years? And I think one of the really big differences is that sort of the exciting part of some of the technologies that have really emerged prior to AI were very much focused on what the technology team liked. Things like cloud or even some of the data and analytics capabilities that preceded AI. The AI is different. The way that it's sort of emerged vis-a-vis Chat GPT or whatever has really been about the part of the iceberg that's actually above the ocean. And it's been very interesting in that it's gotten everybody very, very excited because that part that's above the ocean, that part of the iceberg, is extremely interesting and has seemingly endless possibilities. Unfortunately, I think what we sort of sometimes neglect is that as technologists, at least, we're still responsible for what it is that goes on underneath the ocean. And that piece of it has been I've had some real challenges in terms of discussions with customers around how it is that we can do that, how it is that we can actually sort of address the piece that's below the waterline with respect to AI. And I think the analogy that I was thinking in my head this evening actually was about sort of when the internet first came out. I'm old enough to remember when that started, right? And the idea was, oh gosh, look, the internet is Netscape, isn't it? Because I can go run Netscape 2.0.
It's a good analogy. Yeah, it really is. Yeah. Because it hits that above the iceberg. It also was an above the iceberg introduction to the world, right? It wasn't. I don't need IT in order to do and own this for me, right? This is something I can go home and dial up my computer and get on and do myself.
Except for the fact that it involved all of these, millions of dollars and, tens of years of technology development that have been going on in universities to make that happen, right? And all the plumbing was still there. And I mean, I remember learning IP from scratch, right? Because that was what you did back then. And that really enables the internet. And this is very difficult to explain to people who are just using browsers. And I think often we have that same sort of challenge with AI. Is it's very difficult to explain to people what the possibilities or the interesting part of AI is, because we also have to bring in all of these things about how you actually get it done. And that's been the trick. So, like, just to provide a little bit of structure in the conversation, what I thought we would try to address is two things, really. Like, what are some of the hurdles that are there in order to make AI possible? Like, what are really some of the core things that need to be in place in order to actually just even get started or get started well with respect to AI? But the second piece, and I think probably even more interesting, is what it is that we can do to make artificial intelligence really valuable for companies. So it's not just something that they can say in their brochure that they've done, that they have AI enabled services or whatever, but it's actually something that they can monetize, really drive value for their clients and their customers across the board. So that's sort of how I wanted to start the discussion. And I guess, like, well, why don't I go ahead and sort of just think a little bit about what it is that we can do to make AI possible, right? And I think
Well,
the number
let's
one
define
piece.
the
Sorry,
scope.
go ahead.
It is really
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
because people just call it AI, and AI is a huge category in and of itself. I mean, I always joke with people that AI. I've been doing AI since the early '80s. One of the people you forget or are in our age don't remember the book clubs, the Columbia Book Club, Columbia Tape of the Month Club, right? You get like 50 up front, but you have to buy like 6 more throughout the year, right? And so they had a book club like that and a big part of it was a technology section. And I had this series. I actually just got rid of it recently. But it was 4 volumes, each about that thick, on artificial intelligence. And it was all the algorithms. I mean, you had vision, you had natural language processing, you had knowledge base management. It's a very comprehensive space. Neural networks. This actually, people will call AI, is a very specific subset that is generative AI. It's based on the ability to translate natural language into and generate from a natural language what we equate with a understandable or a human response based on context. Very, very narrow in actual scope. What it does is huge, but really a very small subset of the entire arsenal that is artificial intelligence. And people should understand that, right? We call this, I like to say we're talking generative AI right now, because it's a very specific technology subset.
No, it's a fair point, right? So I think if we specifically narrow the scope down to generative AI and talk about what it is that makes that possible, right? Look, I would argue that the number one thing is going to be data, right? And most organizations that I encounter haven't even begun to address this comprehensively. Um, I remember actually having this discussion about data and analytics just more broadly 4 or 5 years ago, saying like every data project looks about the same, right? There's this notion of visibility, there's this notion of insight, and there's this notion of automation. So first you get as much of the data as you possibly can so that you can actually sort of say, I have a comprehensive data set. And then usually you start off with some very preliminary kind of conclusions in terms of the analysis of that data. Here are some things that we can do. And then eventually you automate that. And that's where AI and generative AI have really started to live. And the secret to this, I guess it's not really a secret, the unfortunate truth about this, I believe, is that there are simply no shortcuts. And everybody that we bump into, a lot of times, like clients have these discussions and they just want to start off with, at best insight, often automation, without really discussing visibility in the data. Has that
I
been
would
your
say
experience as well?
there's one shortcut. I wouldn't call it a shortcut. I would say that in the past, to do the steps you've described and outlined, to get to the point where you can gain insight, you had to undergo a extensive data architecture project. You had to do master data management. You had to organize the data in a structural approach. I would say one of the major changes that I've seen with regard to this that is good is that this technology tends to lend itself towards operating on unstructured content. You could throw anything at it. I mean, literally anything at it. It's just a stream of content, and it will decipher and incorporate it into its space in a way that, it's nothing more than relationships. It's like, oh, here's a stream of data. In this stream, X is close to Y, which is close to Z. I'll take that in. I'll remember that. That's in my memory now, that I continually saw that these three pieces of information are close to each other. Great. I didn't have to go through all that, data organization, structural data organization. But I think the other piece of it that you alluded to is still needed, which is, garbage in, garbage out. I still have a data quality issue that I need to start with.
So it's interesting that how is it that you would solve an unstructured data quality problem? And that's not the simplest thing to manage.
No, and this is where agentic AI is really interesting, right? Because I can start to organize my processing of, I can use the technology itself to teach the technology. So how would I do data quality is I would create an agent whose whole thing is to focus on the quality of the data. So I would start by, that's the one where I would put my focus in my education. That's where I would create the fine tuning. I'd really focus on that one, right? I'd be like, this is appropriate, this is inappropriate, right? And so I'd look at my data, I'd pull out a lot of samples. I would create a fine tuning training package that says, all right, I've gone through, N number of samples, and it's got to be large, a fairly large sample of the data. And I'd say, here are examples. This is good. This is bad. Now you go and you see what it does. Now, and I'm going through that right now with something really simple and stupid. And I'm 3 days, I'm banging my head against the wall trying to train this lightweight LLM. And there's a large language model, and there's trade-offs about fine-tuning these things versus speed. How many tokens, it actually is using, and how big that token space is versus small token spaces, and trying to train them, right? I can get really quick results, but bad classification, or I can give up, another 30 seconds to a minute to let it think about it and look it up and evaluate it, and I get better classification. And of course, then there's trade-offs of hardware. I can throw more hardware at that to bring the length of time down. So it right now is kind of a pull the lever and see what happens kind of, activity, which I don't get, where you're getting all these people who have never touched this technology before that claim to be experts in understanding how these levers work without years of pulling the levers and watching it.
No, that's a great point. And like, I think the notion of supervisory agents is going to be real important for another key reason, I think. And so we experienced this with a client who has essentially PII data that sometimes leaks into what they want to analyze using generative AI. So it's not, typically happens, but it does occasionally happen. And it's enough that it merits having an agent who is actually reviewing the information that's going out to the LLM that's actually sort of determining the value of those discussions, to actually edit them and say, like, okay, well, this is not data that we should be passing on to the next agent. We should actually be restricting this data. So we'll remove it from the data set that's going to be analyzed. And I thought that was interesting. The problem that we bumped into was that essentially those supervisory agents are, not perfect. And the issue becomes like, okay, so if they're 95% okay, if they get it right 95% of the time, is that good enough? And I think, this is something that as we look at this, our clients need to really ask themselves, under what circumstances is 95% going to be good enough? And, if it's not, how is it that I can train it for the rest of that, to get to a confidence level that is okay? And that piece is really important for stuff that's, PII data or, sort of other kind of sensitive data that's out there that you would want to analyze.
Larger domain than even that. I think it's so, I participated in development of this report called the Agentic Process Automation. It's a representation of robotic process automation or business process automation. It's the next, evolution of those technologies that are all kind of being compressed or merged into one space now, which is this APA, right? So, and then what APA is essentially the combination of deterministic workflow or process management using non-deterministic AI as a means of executing tasks. And it's a really complex space because you're expecting a deterministic outcome. And I did this. So I'm building this Gmail, inbox cleaner. So and initially I was like, oh, I'll let it do the work. And then I backed away from that. I said, no, I think I'm just going to have it label and classify the emails for me. And you begin to learn really quickly that, no matter how much you train it, it'll, it's labeling some of the political emails as ads. It's labeling things that are clearly ads as for review. And you're taking that away and go, okay, now why all of a sudden, it's got to return just one word answers. I instruct it, just give me one word answers. You're either an ad, you're either politics, or you're a review, right? And I created 3 buckets, very simple, not even a lot of buckets. And it does about 80% accuracy. Now, for this process, that's fine. For what you're talking about, it's not acceptable. I need a perfect and repeatable deterministic outcome. Not going to get that from AI today. It's just not there. Now you're getting better with the larger language models, the ones with billions, the Claude models, the Gemini models, right? Okay, but now I'm delegating to using a service provider, an LLM service provider, who has spent a lot of money building their model by consuming the entire world. And so I have the issues of that we probably will talk about in a moment about what's in there, garbage in, garbage out. But they give me speed and they give me better accuracy because they have billions of parameters that they've put through and a lot more samples, right? So now you get these trade-offs. But if I'm an organization and I'm looking at this, do I really want to pay Anthropic, millions of dollars a year to use their engine? Or do I want to try to get my own engine fine-tuned and working specifically and narrowly on my domain and problem? But even still, now I have the issue of, all right, well, I got to go get some GPUs to speed this thing up, make it usable. And I also have to fine-tune it and watch it.
Well, I mean, I think it's even more sort of complicated than that in a lot of ways. So the client issue here is that the agent, the supervisory agent is the one that's now going to burn all the cycles, right? Yep. And you're still one step away from actual business value.
That's right.
And even if you get the information out and it's PII clean, it still has to go out to another model, which is actually going to provide the business insight. So the problem is that this ends up looking an awful lot like overhead, right? And it's overhead that actually just reduces the value of whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, which makes you sort of ask the question, and I think it's been asked quite a bit lately, is like, well, is this really worth it? Is this really going to yield results in these kinds of circumstances? And so I think, as much as what makes it possible, I think understanding the limitations of what's available with respect to generative AI is important so that you can ask the right questions of it and really get the value out of it from a business perspective, because it sounds and feels to me like it can be a black hole, right?
You raise a great point. Just because I can do this, should I be doing this? Right? I mean, that's the answer, right? All right, great. You've given me this new tool, and I can, use this new tool to do all this work on my behalf, and might even be having people who are doing this today, so I don't have to expend labor on it. Now, if you're expending labor on it, I think you immediately get to a labor arbitrage calculation that's fairly simple, right? That's a give me. But if you're creating this new architecture, you then have to ask, the question you're asking, which is, okay, I can do this. Should I be doing this? Is this worth it?
Yeah. And look, I think that segues really nicely into the second part of our discussion, which is really about what makes it valuable, right? So if I'm an organization and I'm looking at deploying AI and generative AI specifically, and I have all of the requirements that we talked about earlier with respect to, understanding data quality and having, unstructured data, but still being able to bring it to the right places. It's available. I've got a relatively complete view across that. Next question then is, okay, so how do I actually make this something that's business focused and is actually going to show consistent ROI, right? And I think one of the things that we sort of bump into a lot is that there is sort of an architecture that's associated with training versus inference that there is not a great deal of depth of understanding on this with respect to how businesses are going to go forward with this. So the view of having the right sort of data set that we can present to the training models, and then being able to use the inference models closer to the edge in such a way that we can actually return data or return information quickly and make sure that users are actually getting real value out of this in the short term. That's the piece there where we haven't seen a lot of discipline in terms of emerging architectures. Kind of wonder if you're seeing the same thing.
I see two primary uses, one much more heavily discussed than the other. The first we've hit on a little, which is process automation. I see this technology be attempting to be thrown heavily at process automation, which it can be useful in the right spaces. I think the opportunity that is more ignored, and I think this is because people just haven't got their head. I mean, we've been trained to be deterministic in business. It's just our CRMs, our ERPs, all of our systems, our HR systems, they're all deterministic. If I press this button this time at this way with this data, every single time I'll get the same result. And in no way, shape, or form will that deviate, because the outcome is not random. It's based on a program, right? You introduce large language models or non-deterministic outcomes. Every time you press that button, it could be different. There's actually something called LLM drift, right? Prompt drift, where because of the way you asked the question last time, the next time you might get a different answer. You actually, it's Schrodinger's cat. The minute you press that button, you change the outcome, right? And you change
I was thinking actually it's more like talking to my children, right? Every time I ask them a question, I get a slightly different answer. But yes, I agree.
Yeah, right. That's a fair one. Children very much are like the AI. But the other piece of it is where non-deterministic works well. Sentiment analysis. It's okay. A 75% chance that this might happen. Financial markets, right? Black swan type events, things like that. Fraud. What's the chances, or what's the likelihood that there's fraud? What is the likelihood that if I combine these chemicals in this way, which I've never done before, it will fix this problem or heal this person? What are the those type of solutions, and it is being applied there, but you don't hear it as much. And I think that's where this technology really thrives right now, because you don't have the consistency, you don't have the determinism that you would expect for process automation, right? So yeah, again, everyone's looking at it as a labor arbitrage issue, and I can have AI replace. No, you can't, because the only thing they really replace well today is the person in accounting who you ask, what is the likelihood we're going to get paid? Oh, sir, that's an 85% likelihood they're going to pay their bill. Right? Okay. Well, great. That you're replaced now. I can replace you with a bot.
Yeah. Look, there's been a lot of talk, particularly in consulting, about how it is that we would use this, right? Because we are asked to process vast amounts of data, and a lot of it is sort of non-deterministic, at least in the larger sense, right?
Right.
And I think that the ability to come to likely insights, not certain insights, but likely insights very quickly, is extremely valuable for my particular profession, right? That's what we need to do in a lot of cases, right? And I think you're right. It's a perfect use case, right? Because it doesn't really hinge on the fact that you're 100% correct, presuming that it's unsupervised, supervised, right? Or that it is supervised. Unsupervised sort of capabilities along those lines sound kind of dangerous to me still, because there is that zone of uncertainty. But the supervised capabilities of being able to consume that much information and then spit back something that looks like insight, that is extremely valuable. And I guess I mean, I'm curious because you've obviously done more in the process automation space than I have, certainly around this. So what does it mean in process automation to be 85% correct? Is there a supervised level that needs to be there in order to make sure it works, or what are the safety levers that need to be in place to make this valuable?
Well, people say that they can make that work. Again, it wouldn't be for I wouldn't apply it to a bank transaction, right? Which again, repeatability and consistency, acidity must be incorporated into the outcome of the transaction. Uh, Sales, marketing, those are areas where I think it could apply. Who is a likely candidate that I should approach for that who might need my product, right? Based upon all these other pieces of information, the type of industry they're in, type of products that they produce, right? What kind of message can I send them that would make sense? I think it does well there, right? Formulate for me a strategy, formulate for me the messaging that I should include that would make sense to them in their language, about their industry and how what I'm selling in my service will, help them and benefit them. I think it can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the strange side effects of generative AI's emergence has been this notion that there is actually an awful lot of business value that's gleaned from non-deterministic analysis, right? And I think maybe that wasn't something that people would admit to before. I don't know, but the use cases around AI have driven that in such a way that I find it very interesting, because there is real value to be had there, right? And
There is.
I think the question is, how is it that it can be captured? But look, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you too. So look, there are a lot of people who are sort of committed to this journey, and maybe they've committed in ways that are not as we've described in terms of the discipline that's associated with it. So how would you recommend people go forward who maybe have sort of started this journey, but maybe haven't thought about it in the way that we're describing? What would you do for them?
For me, it always gets back to what is the business goal, right? I actually have a methodology and a workshop that walks customers through from business goal to POC/MVP in a very short time frame. And the goal and the whole real purpose of that is to take a business goal and break it down into the pieces of deterministic and non-deterministic components, and then identify what can I do, or what do I need to do to have this operate in a production like manner, right? And what kind of security do I need? What do I need? How do I need to validate the data that I'm putting into this? Can I use a publicly hosted LLM, or do I need to do something on my own? If I did something on my own, how would I go about training this, right? Who can access it? How do I make sure people aren't adding stuff into the LLM and that ends up messing up my outcomes, right? After I train it, after I fine tune it, what if another process? I'm not even talking about maliciously. What if another process determines, I'll reuse Joe's LLM? He's got one out there, and now all of a sudden it's like when my wife and I use the same package, and she gets annoyed because she comes in and it's like, I had my project all set up for this, and now I'm seeing these other pieces of it, these other options come in, and it's like, yes, I had this organized to work for a specific purpose, and now you're adding in all this peripheral pieces of information that have nothing to do with that, and it doesn't know different. It's trying to accommodate. It has an algorithm, right? YouTube, simply as simple as that, right? All of a sudden you have your YouTube. You go to YouTube, after a while it learns you, it gives you data, it gives you videos that you're interested in. Now imagine that your kids got on there and started watching videos on your account, right? And the next time you go to watch, it's like, why is SpongeBob coming up now all of a sudden in my list of videos, right? It learns, it's an algorithm. And so those algorithms can be modified based upon what it's being asked to do. And I think that employees, that is where the risk is involved, or part of the risk is, you have to have controls. And I don't think many of these organizations that started this have any clue what controls look like in, a generative AI architecture.
So that's, I mean, it's a great point. So the controls that we're talking about are around output quality, as well as what it is that is being drawn in, right? Because effectively you need to have some sort of feedback loop, but you also need to be able to understand what the limitations are, what it is that's going to be drawn in to be used across this LLM. Is that right? And are there others that we would want to sort of think about across that?
Well, for me, that's the big one is you need to control who has access to it, what data is being sent to it after you fine tune it, right? You only want it consistent for that purpose, right? And you don't want peripheral, extraneous information introduced. I would say, that if you control the inputs and you fine tune it to a certain way, you can rely a certain degree on the outputs, which is good because that requires less maintenance and overhead. But I think occasionally you have to do sampling, right? It's like a chip foundry, right? You get to the point where, okay, my sample size can be smaller over time. I'm pretty much sure that this process is creating, I've had batches that are 99.8% pure. That's great. But I think, twice a week, I got to take a sampling and make sure that the machine hasn't, moved a thousandth of a millimeter and now I'm off, right? And so, yeah, you're initially it's a curve, it's a hump, right? And initially you're doing high degree of testing to ensure that the outcome you expect is consistent and remaining consistent. And then over time you can reduce, but you still continually sample over time to make sure that you haven't had any drift. And if you do, you may need to restart or get back to here's a great one. Taking snapshots. I'm going to snapshot this model at this point in time because I may need to restore it at a later point to get to make sure that my process gets back into alignment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So, I mean, we had this discussion about chatbots, it seems, before, where, the problem is that if you don't test and you suddenly find that you have a racist chatbot, right? It's not just it's not just racist once; it's racist to every single person who comes through, right? And it's it's not the same level of problem of having an employee who is misbehaving. This is your chatbot is misbehaving consistently, which can provide some pretty ugly business results for you very quickly. So yeah, test, and I think I'm seeing sort of the notion of how test-driven development has worked in sort of development now for years start to become like a prompt engineering kind of feedback loop, and that piece of it I think is really, really valuable, is to get people with that kind of discipline to be looking at how it is that they're building prompts. And I hope I hope see more of that in the future, I guess.
Well, and that's where you kind of need LLMs to train LLMs, because if I do a agile process, and I the way I test-driven development, I build my test. I'm going to send you XYZ. I expect you to send me back 1, 2, 3, right? And so I can build a test that makes a call to a function, and I can look at the outcome and say, I'm expecting 1, 2, 3. I got 1, 2, 3. Great, right? But now I send a LLM a prompt, and now the prompt might come back as different words but mean the same thing. So now I need something that can interpret that and say, does it mean this, right? And that's a lot harder, right? So my testing now is I'm looking for something, a response that means this. It doesn't matter the exact words. Does the response mean X, Y, Z? And so you need an LLM that can then look at the outcome of an LLM to say, yeah, I would say that there's 95% chance that it means what you think it means. So if you're saying, the sky is blue, I'm going to say yes. It answered you the sky is blue. It didn't tell you it was yellow. Didn't tell you it was green. Didn't tell you it was orange. So it may have said sky blue. It may have said cyan. Right? This is a great one. One I was working on with pharmaceuticals, because you have generics, you have multiple tiers, all with different names, but they all mean the same thing, right? Acetaminophen is acetaminophen, but is it Advil? Is it Tylenol? Is it, so depending upon what name you get, you then have to say, look, I'm just asking, do they want acetaminophen? I'll figure out what tier later, but are they requesting acetaminophen? So, it gets to, that kind of degree where, yeah, I'm pretty sure that this sales order is asking for acetaminophen. They may have asked for it differently by name. So those type of operations all can get to, you can do it in testing, but it's LLM and LLM working together, right?
I find it just amazing too, sort of as a parting thought here too, because my degree is in philosophy and I studied philosophy of language in school. And I think, after 25 years in the industry, it's finally valuable. I'm not exactly sure how exactly that happened, but being able to answer questions like that about the, sort of equivalent phrases and what those actually mean, what that term actually means it's been a very interesting kind of twist for, I think, people who are unused to thinking that way. So it's been kind of fun.
Right after the attention white paper came out and I understood what they were doing, one of the first things that struck me that I noted was how, not unsurprising because everything's math, but how mathematical our language is, right? Because what they've broken our language down to is the relative distance of one word to another to decipher meaning, right? What follows what is the word that most likely follows the cat is? Well, I've seen that sentence 50 million times, and here's the probability, layout of what the next answer is. Brown. Really, what it tells you is that most cats are brown.
I was going with Schrodinger on that one. The cat is dead.
But it is interesting, right? That ultimately what this tells us is how mathematical our universe is.
Absolutely. So we're about out of time. So any parting thoughts, JP, before we sign off?
Parting thoughts are really just, I enjoyed this. I wish you and I would do more of this. We've chatted over the years. This topic really, I think, what's interesting is how we were both kind of passionate to make our clients aware of the challenges and the hurdles that occur because of this technology and what goes into really using it in a business value sense. And I think that's important. I don't see enough of that. I do see a lot of pitches on Facebook about how to use AI to make millions, but I think the only people making money there are the people who are getting $5 a hit when you click the button.
I think it's AI who's generating that too. So it's
Exactly.
that much. So anyway, so yeah, I wish we would have more time for discussions. 12 time zones is always a challenge, but we will we'll have to find a way around that.
And
look, thank you very much for your time.
For me, next time I will be doing an evening for you.
Excellent. Look, thanks. I really appreciate it, and we will speak again soon.